Well, I've always liked the look of these little North American Arms 22 revolvers that fit on a belt buckle. Yeah, many of you will know of them, and they're little 22 long rifle revolvers, and they come with a long rifle version and 2 short version, which is probably that one there. You can find diagrams on the internet about how they function. Various parts, like there's the mainspring, hammer, and all the parts are described down at the bottom there. So what I've done here is I've just done a compilation of the various pictures and so on, and then what I've done is I've cut out one of these, and that's given me this little devil here, this little cut out in paper. So then what I've done is I've drawn that down onto some card. Well, no, tell a lie. I've drawn this directly onto some 3mm thick sheet metal, and that basically gave me this by drawing onto that, yeah, and then cutting out the various parts. So my plan was, as I can't have a real firing version, I thought I'll do just a dummy replica, mount it on a piece of oval shaped brass and make a brass belt buckle with a dummy North American Arms style revolver on it. Now, if I was in Europe, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, all those places, then I could save my time trying to make one of these, and I could actually buy one of these. This is a Little Joe blank firer, and it's also mounted on a belt buckle. But I suspect they're not made out of very good metal. I've read people saying that as soon as they started firing it, the hammer snapped, things like that. So they look really good. If you see them, various pictures of them on the internet, they come in different colours, different shades of what I'm presuming is alloy metal. So they're probably cast, although they're nicely made. They're made in Germany. The problem with the things, or the reason I should say that they don't get over to the UK, is because they actually have a barrel discharge of some form. Basically they fire flares. They have a threaded barrel on them, and the flare fitment fits into there. Now, if they made a version of these where they had a side or top discharge and the barrel was blocked, maybe if they had discharge holes around the sides of the cylinder, then they could sell these to the UK. But because they don't make that, the UK loses out, doesn't get to have one of these. So you can see how these mount. I believe from memory, you push that little button there and some part of the mechanism releases and the gun comes off the belt buckle. You can see it's got a little captive device on there, little stud with a grip in it. So that obviously pushes into the hole there, and then by pushing that, it releases a spring. You can see that spring catches into the little gripper position there. So by pushing that, releases the spring, and the thing just releases from the buckle. So I'm sure that's not too hard to duplicate. But yeah, so I started thinking, well, all I have to do is, if I just want something simple, is cut one of these out, put a little cylinder in the middle that spins round, and weld a pin across on it at the back to hold the cylinder in. So a bit of 3mm steel, and voila, you've got something. You can always stamp whatever you want in the brass over the top with some letter stamps, and if you want to make it a little bit fancy, you could cut out some little leaves and so on, and some tin plate or thin brass, and solder them onto the brass belt buckle. Yeah, you could do quite a nice little job. Of course, being me being me, I then, after I cut one out, I started to think, well, it would be nice if the thing actually did a little bit more than just being a piece of steel plate on a belt buckle. So that got me around to thinking, well, what I'd need to do is cut another one of these. So that's exactly what I went and did. And of course, I decided, well, for this one, I don't need the hammer on it, because if I'm going to put something, if I'm going to do something different with this, then the hammer's not going to be required. So that means cutting the hammer, grinding the hammer off on that one, and then basically you've got two of these. Yeah, so that becomes 6mm thick all of a sudden. These could be screwed together or welded together, soldered together. If you've really pushed, well, glued together. But let's not go there. Okay, so that leads you to that. So that's now 6mm thick, as I just mentioned. Now, the next thing is you need some sort of a mechanism inside this if you're going to do something more than just have a dummy gun stuck on a belt, well, on a buckle. So that means you've got to design or devise a simple mechanism that goes inside. Now, first of all, I will say this is not to be a 2.2 long rifle firing version of a revolver. Okay, to do a 2.2 long rifle version, this gun would actually have to be larger, and I'm deliberately making this smaller than one of these. So the most that this could be is some form of a cap pistol. So as it's just a cap pistol and I'm trying to keep things simple, I'm not going to incorporate a mechanism to make the cylinder revolve. To do that, you've got to be quite good, know what you're doing with various bits and bobs, and you've got to be able to make a little hand and various springs, and they've got to be incorporated into the hammer mechanism, and they've got to be able to rotate the cylinder by clipping into a little gear which is based on the rear of a cylinder on a 22, and that's not something that that you can find easy to do. You can do it, I'm not saying you can't, but it takes a lot of effort and precision work. So this is purely going to be, at the best, a little cap pistol. So you can rotate the cylinder one chamber at a time, cock the hammer back, push the trigger, and fire a little plastic cap. The types of caps I'm talking about are these sort of caps, ring caps. Now these ring caps come in 8-shot capacity, Yeah, 8-shot. Now this little pistol, being so small, won't take an 8-shot ring cap. So the most I can do is cut these up and then fit them into the cylinder. Yeah, so you get these caps in lots of toy shops still. So how many shots is this little pistol going to be able to take? I think at the most 5, could be only 4. The cylinder at the moment, the aperture for the cylinder is only about 15 millimeters across here, so that's not allowing for very much. It may end up only being 3. I'll work this out at a later date anyway. So to come up with a mechanism, so the next stage was to draw onto a piece of cardboard. So that's given me this simple little mechanism here. Now I'll just put that down there. Now that's not enough of a clash. Let's see, what have we got? I'll just lie that there, and we'll put that mechanism on top of there. So basically what we're looking at is something very simple. The idea is there's a cutaway. Basically these are parts which are going to be made separately in 4 or 5 millimeter steel. So basically this part here with probably a dummy barrel coming forward there and coming round under the cylinder aperture, yeah, that's one component there, yeah. Next component is obviously the hammer, so that's got to be cut out, and I've marked in where the pivot points are going to be on the hammer, so they need to be drilled. Here is a little tuck away trigger mechanism, and that little space there is for a little coil spring to be fitted in, and there's the pivot point for the trigger. Down here we've got a hole which goes through the trigger grip, and that's going to hold the grip plates on the side. Now they may be wood, but due to this thing being so thin and so small, I'm very tempted to make these side plates in brass. So it's going to be brass and steel, and I think it'll look quite nice. So basically this space here which I've drawn in, that's going to be a cutaway, and it's going to have a piece of spring steel in there. So the spring steel wraps around in a curve here and then comes up to that point there, so it sits round in a curve. Now when you cock that hammer back there, yeah, it pushes the spring steel down this way. Now I'm gonna have to do some tweaking to the design on this to get the mechanism fine-tuned, but so I basically might have to file a little bit of steel away on the trigger until it all works correctly. And this little piece here, that is where the trigger mechanism will clip straight into. So it's very simple. There's only there's 3 parts if you count the spring. So it's basically a small little tuck away trigger, the hammer and a spring, and obviously the cylinder which you basically spin. Now if I can come up with a device to make the cylinder lock into a number of positions by having some sort of little device which makes it click into place, you know, like a spring-loaded ball bearing or a small piston with a spring on it, maybe mounted somewhere here, maybe a little piece of steel with a curve on it at the top and a little rod running through with a spring on it. Maybe the rod could even come straight through the body down here, push down when you're rotating the cylinder, and the cylinder just needs to have little semi holes drilled into it, which that point clicks into, so that it lines up. Now, in terms of loading caps into it, the idea is that I'll pull a pin out here under the barrel, and the cylinder will basically come out in your hand, and you just basically load the caps in, put it back and push the pin through. Keeping it simple, not too much effort. So that's where I'm up to. Now the next stage is to actually start to make these parts for the center of the gun on some steel. So this is 5mm piece of scrap steel I've got lying around in the garage. It's only going to be mild steel. It's only a cap gun. Most cap guns are made out of pot metal, and they're designed just to last weeks, months, and if you don't use them ever, then they might last for years if they're just sat in a box or sat in a drawer and never played with. But the odds are they get played with and the things fall to bits, because they're pot metal, they're cast alloys. Now, so that's the point where I'm going to be getting up to, cutting this out, drawing it down, and then sawing, grinding, filing, and making up the little parts. Okay, with a little work, this is what I ended up with. At the moment it's just pushed together partly. I've got a 2.5mm drill bit stuffed in through there, through the centre. If I take this side off, I've still got the original dummy hammer on that side, but here inside is the workings of it. So you can see it rotates like so. So basically it's going to have a little trigger fitted in just around here, so that when you push the trigger in this end here, it opens up, and when that's cocked back like so, the top end of the trigger mechanism will catch onto that little notch there, and then when you pull the trigger back, that notch will release and the hammer will fly forwards. Now in the back here, this is where I'm having some sort of, maybe a piece of flat spring steel in here curving round, which will be the hammer mainspring, and obviously when you cock that back it will compress it there. Then when I've finished all this, I'm probably going to weld this side back on, as I've done on the other side down here. Basically what I've done is I've cut little sections out and I've V'd the edges of the steel and I've welded it in with the MIG welder. Now once I've put the other side on, then I'm going to grind and file this all back into shape so that it looks relatively neat. Yes, so sort of should work. So I'm using one hand while I'm messing around with this, but there's the hammer mechanism. See how it comes through in the centre there? Yeah. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to saw this dummy cylinder pin part off there, and I'm going to rework the front end of that there, and it should come out looking a little bit nicer. I may also put some, as I said, some brass grips on here, and the brass grip, it might go through, it might have a pin running through it to the centre. Where's that screw? It might have a pin running through it there. As you'll notice inside, I've left a nice piece of steel inside there, so I can have a hole running through there, and it'll be threaded either probably into one of the side plates. And what I'm thinking is, if I do it in brass, then the brass can actually come up and it can cover this area here, and it can hold the pin in there. In fact, if I make the pin slightly longer and put two little recesses in the brass, I can make the brass lock on the hammer pin, so that should work out quite nice. Okay, so I've got all the, well, most of the little bits of the mechanism made now. That's the little trigger there. Now what I've got to do is I've got to drill a little hole in the back of that there and put a coil spring in it, and I've also got to weld a little piece of steel back into that gap so that the spring has something to act against to push it forwards. Now the spring in the back here seems to be doing its job. See, we can push it, and then if I had an extra pair of fingers I could probably cock that thing, but anyway, you get the idea. I'm just doing this, holding this in with some rivet stems and things like this at the moment to try and get it all to get into position. So yeah, so what I've done is I've chamfered all the edges that I'm going to be welding. I need to do that one there as well, so I'll get on with that. I've chamfered all the way around. I'm going to weld that in with a MIG and then grind it back. Okay, so this is how it's working out now. What I'm doing is I'm using these little red ring caps, and I've countersunk the cylinder down so that the caps just fit inside. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to machine some small like cartridges, cartridge type things, basically little pins which will act as anvils for the caps, and I've set all these to the same depth where I've drilled them, so the hammer should basically fire them against the little pins. And if you want to take it, strip it down and clean it, you can take the actual center pin out. Now as an extra, I could, if I can be bothered, make the center pins hollow so that the flash actually goes through the center of the cylinder and comes out on the back. Yeah, so we'll see how it works. Okay, I've now blued the little pistol. I've still got a few things I've got to work out though, because I'm not come up with my best thought on how to hold the cylinder in. I really need something better here than just a nail pushed in. So I'm going to keep thinking about that. At the moment I've just got some temporary pins knocked through here. They're just nails with a little bit of messing around on them. But the frame's blued up, and the cylinder and hammer are blued up quite nicely. So what I'm doing right now is I'm having a mess around with some brass for the belt buckle, and I've just drawn around this oval of brass, and I'm just drilling the holes out around the outline, and then I'll either put a small like thread saw in, or I'll just chisel it along and then cut it, stamp it out, and file it. I'm not sure how I'm going to rig up the actual fitting of the gun into it to hold it there. I've seen the way the other manufacturers do them with like a little pin with a cutaway around the edge, and then they use a piece of spring steel which grips in sideways, and you have another device which you push and it splays those two pieces of spring steel and pops it out. I'm not 100% sure whether I like that idea. I can appreciate it keeps the overall lines of the gun looking quite nice and doesn't cover it over. But I'm just not sure whether I like it for something that is secure. I don't want the pistol falling out on me. A really crude basic thing would be put a leather strap across it, but that's a little bit too simple. I don't know. I'm gonna have to keep thinking on that one. Yeah, so with a little bit of work I've ended up with that. Looks quite nice. Yeah. I think what I'll do is I'll put some 6mm polycarbonate on the back of it rather than a piece of wood, and then maybe finish off the back with another sheet of brass. That's my sort of thought. So I'll have 2mm of brass, then 6mm polycarb, and then 2mm of brass again at the back. Then I can put some brass rivets for it to bind it all together, and maybe put some adhesive on it as well. I don't know. Yeah, so it should look okay once it's once I've done a little bit more work. Right, so I've got the brass fascia and I've got 6mm polycarbonate underneath it now. So you can see it's sort of put a bit of depth to it. The cylinder's not pinned at the moment, so it's loose, but you can see you can see the pistol right through to the back. Yeah. So yeah, so I think another brass plate maybe on the very base, and then put some brass or copper rivets right through it. Obviously I probably want to put some writing on it. Now whether to etch it or just letter stamp it, I'm tempted to say put British Bulldog on it or something like that, just for something different rather than trying to copy whatever else there is around. And I might put my name on it or something. I'll have a think. Right, so what I'm doing now, if I turn the camera upside down, is I've made the back plate for the buckle. What I decided to do in the end was, rather than making it an actual buckle, I've made it so that you can pass the belt right through it and then have the buckle in another position, because all the buckles I looked at that had been designed with these guns on just had a pin coming out, and I didn't really think very much of them. I thought they look like they'll pop apart, so I thought, you know what, to make life easy, why not just make it so that it's got loops on it in brass, so that you can pass a belt through each side and then fasten it at the side. So if you wanted, you could actually place this somewhere else other than right in the middle of your trousers where the buckle would be, so you could hide this if you wish to. Although it's not something you really want to hide, because I think it looks quite nice. I've also stamped Bulldog on it there, because that's what I really think they look like. They look like an old Bulldog revolver. So I'm just doing this, and then what I'm using is copper nails, roofing nails, and I'm going to rivet it together with these 4 copper roofing nails. So the polycarbonate's in there, there's brass each side. Yeah, I still haven't come up with how I'm going to strap it across, but I'll work something out. So now I've done that, it's looking quite good. So the copper nails are not riveted over yet, but you can see here I've cut some holes in the back so that parts, the cylinder and the trigger grip that's not been made yet, will fit through. So yeah, I think it's quite nice. You know, it's an alternative way of doing a belt buckle gun. Yeah, you could put it at the side of the belt buckle. You know, this can always be modified if at a later date I decide to change the way the buckle fastens. I can always take the rivets out and solder something on the back maybe to make it work differently. Anyway, I'm fairly happy with that. Right, so I've made this little trigger here, and as you can see I've got a very small coil spring in the back of it, and that coil spring basically sits in that gap down inside there and pushes back. Then what I'm doing is I'm using a very small roll pin, which is about 2mm in diameter by about 10mm long, and that's going to go through there and hold the trigger mechanism in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a punch, and I'm lightly going to punch in both ends so that if I want in the future I can tap the roll pin out again. Right. Right, so that gives me that. Seems to work all right. Yeah, this is I think a 2.5. No, it's probably a 3mm tap, metric tungsten tap. And you've got to basically take your time when you're doing something like this. The idea is I'm going to thread the hole running through the grip, and then I'm probably going to put a small brass screw in from the wood grip on each side, due to the metal being 10mm or so in thickness. That should be more than adequate to grip a screw from each side to hold a grip on. Right, this is some beech wood off the tree in my front garden. Tree's 300 years old. Obviously this piece of wood isn't 300 years old, but I always try and make use of whatever I have kicking about. Beech is a nice reasonable wood for making gun stocks and tool handles and so on. So if it's free, use it. Okay, so I've got the strap on it. I've got some sort of retaining device. It's a little wing nut I've made up. Not brilliant, but it at least holds it in. I might put a bit of leather or something around the brass strip, or just whip some string over it, or cotton or something. Anyway, that'll do for now. Right, okay, so I've just done a quick improvement to this. I didn't like the wing nut idea that I'd done, soldering that over it. I thought it looked a bit naff after staring at it for a bit. So I found this brass Schrader valve cap in one of my bits boxes, and I've simply soldered that onto the top of the screw which I was using to retain it, and I filed down a little brass nut under there which is screwed onto the shaft, so that now holds it all down. If I unscrew that there, we can flip that back, and there you are. So you can see how it's done. Basically there's a captive brass nut inside there behind this plate, which is soldered to the front brass plate, so that works. And this is just a copper roofing nail which I've pushed through and then soldered down on the back brass plate underneath. Yeah, so that's not too bad. Yeah, I think it's an improvement. As I say, I don't really like the idea of putting a captive, a pin to hold the gun captive going through the back. They use like a lift the dot pin, which normally clips between two steel springs. Now I just sort of thinking that could fail, whereas this strap going over it, it's sort of like belt and braces, I will agree. You know, it's but I don't think the thing's going to fall out due to this, as long as you've made sure that that nut's fairly tight. We're pretty much in business. Okay, so I know it all looks a little bit crude, but you know, I think it's all right.